everyone. Before we jump into this week's podcast, a quick note to say that this was recorded before the Damian Lillard trade went down, so you may hear some things that may not line up with where the NBA is today. Enjoy the pod.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Swingman Podcast. It's podcast number 132. As ever, I'm your host, Jordan Ledger, joined us all the time by Louis Halpin and Lewis Howard. In this podcast, we're going to just sort of, it's not going to be a really long one. It's not going to be a super detailed one. We're just going to have some chat about what we're expecting to see in the NBA season for the 2023 to 2024 season. But before we get into that, Louis and Lewis, as always, how you doing?
Yeah, not bad. We've had quite the layoff with the podcast. This will be the first one for a while before the season gets started, and then obviously we'll be jumping into it quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't think the viewers from home will be aware of our recording times right now, but I feel like you've caught us on the right sort of life beating us down type of time. But I'm excited to talk about this. Like Lewis says, we haven't discussed NBA in quite a while. Not really much newsworthy things have happened in the intervening time, I would say, but when you're getting around the corner to the start of the season and you're sort of surveying the prospects of every team, how they've done in the off season, it is quite exciting going into it. And there's a few different things I think we can get from this season as well. So yeah, I'm excited.
So I think if we're going to do this, let's run through. I mean, we spoke about this before and how we'd organise this pod and where we're going to go around it. But I think at the start, let's speak about title contenders, because that's at the end of it. That's the crux. That's the main thing. In terms of your sort of expectations going into this year, Louis, where are you planning? Well, not planning, but where are you foreseeing what teams are going to be there or thereabouts?
I mean, I think a similar sort of group of teams from last season, if I'm quite honest. I think more so, I feel like the West is stronger this year in terms of like teams that I think could actually go all the way. Although there was some competition there last year. So we've got obviously the reigning champions, Denver Nuggets, will definitely be in there again. Phoenix Suns have obviously done an absolute madness in the off season, so you have to mention them. The Lakers have been really good in the off season as well. And also the Warriors with like a completely new look team that I just can't even really comprehend how they're going to play. But those are the ones that are coming to my mind just like automatically. But I'm sure there's going to be others that sort of crop up. And then from the East is a little bit different. I feel like the Bucks and the Celtics really stand out on a separate tier to me personally, because Miami are obviously the finals team from last year. They're in a kind of waiting game, and I eventually guess they're going to end up with Damian Lillard, but they're not there yet. And I don't really think that team is stronger than it was last season. And then the Sixers are just, your 50-50 toss-up kind of team. And those are the ones that I feel like you can sort of like solidly say, if anything, any more teams, I think you're going for a real punt there. But I'd be interested to see if there's any others that you two think could come into the equation.
Yeah, I mean, so the way I decided to go through this is I put the teams in like a tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's difficult. I will say it's difficult doing that for East and West because, as Louis said, the West is overall, I think, stronger going into next year. So when you put them, if you're putting them together, you've got some East teams that are going to make the playoffs that are just worse than some of the bottom, like play-in teams in the West. So it's a difficult way to do it. But where I had it, I kind of put the first two were title contenders and then knocking on the door. And so the title contenders, I only had 4. And from the West, I had the Nuggets and the Suns. I think they're the two teams that I'd put above the rest, purely because we saw what Denver and we saw what Jokic did last season. Jamal Murray stepped up to the occasion in the playoffs yet again, but to an even higher level this time. Great role players. They've lost a couple of people, but I think everyone thinks they'll be there and thereabouts. And then the Suns, we saw how offensively explosive Devin Booker and KD are. I mean, we all knew that anyway, but they were performing at an extremely high level against the Nuggets, gave them the hardest challenge. And now they've added some pieces, they've added Bradley Beal, so they should be there and thereabouts as well. And then from the East, I went for the Celtics, which I think is kind of the team everyone's, or most people have been picking to be the champion next season. Maybe because if they're going between them and the Nuggets, just the fact that the Nuggets won it this year, they pick the Celtics for the next year. But I think that's the team that everyone would pick at the moment, or most people would pick. And I've got the Bucks as well with them as the two in the East that are a step above the rest, as Luke said. And I'll quickly do knocking on the door as well. So I'll put the Warriors, as you said, Louis, just because I don't think you can ever really count them out, especially with someone like Steph on the team, who's still probably a top 3 player in the NBA at the moment. But the Lakers, once again, you alluded to them before. AD and LeBron looks good in the playoffs. They've added a couple nice pieces. They've kept a lot of those players that really stepped up for them as well. And then I threw in the Clippers as well.
Ooh.
Because even though we still haven't seen them put it together, and I feel like we've been saying this for years now, they do have the pieces, and I do think they're probably going to get one more. I don't think it'll be Harden, but it could be someone else. I don't know, maybe a Brogdon, because there was rumours of them wanting him and him being a bit annoyed with the Celtics before. But a player like that, I think they'll probably add, and they'll have the pieces to compete. Whether that actually comes to fruition, I don't know, because we've been saying it every year. And then the East, I put the 76ers because they're almost like the Clippers, but maybe even slightly a step up with the roster they've got. They should be really in that title contenders bracket, but with what's been going on, you just don't trust them. So I had to put them in that tier below. And then the other team I put was the Heat. And that is almost the antithesis of the last two I just said, which is you don't think they've got the roster to compete with some of those big teams, but they have shown that they can over the past few years. So you have to give them that respect and throw them in there as well. And that's all the things I've got.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really argue with any of them. I think they're sort of top 6, 8 that everyone's going to suggest. What are you going to say, Lou?
If we're going sort of broad opinions, themes, or whatever, this is my pick for my opinion that's probably going to be wrong, but I really strongly believe in it. I really don't think the Suns are going to be that good. I've just got a feeling. I just have a feeling. It just seems, you go.
In recent years of how we've seen these sort of big threes put together, I'm yet to see one where I'm like, okay, this works long term. I think it always, there's too many eggs that break here. Booker or Beal are going to want the ball in their hands too much. KD is going to need the ball in his hands quite a bit. It would be impressive, and it's mad to say when you think about Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, it's going to be impressive if they pull it off, I think, in this rate, just because of how many of these sort of big super teams in recent years we've seen fail. I know the statement that I've just said of that listed those players and saying it's going to be impressive if they pull it off, but just quickly in terms of my sort of predictions of what I'm expecting to see in terms of NBA champions, I don't think Denver will be in the they'll be in the conversation, but they're not in the realm for me. I don't think they're going to have that same drive again. I've got the and again, this just is all feeling. I've got nothing to go on this off, but I really like the look of the Celtics for this season. Not just because like Kristaps Porzingis tips them over the edge for it, but I think they were a really good outfit last year. I think they got a bit unlucky with certain injuries at certain points. Marcus Smart is a big loss for them, but I think it'll be a kick-on year for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. But I think with some of the spacing that they're going to get, a bit more time together, for me, the Celtics are really strong. The Bucks as well, I want to put in there, but just too much noise going out at the minute with Giannis' contract situation. And that doesn't affect things on the court, but it really, really does when it comes into the off-the-court stuff and the speculation that will come around it.
My opinion going into every season is always that I don't feel like the teams who made the finals last year then make the finals next year. If you look at like the trend of like, I think the last 4 or 5 seasons, that hasn't been the case ever since like the Warriors and the Cavs got there a couple of times. So I'm not entirely disagreeing with that. I think the Lakers are really strong. Like their off season was probably the most impressive out of anyone here, if I'm quite honest. So we're just relying too much there, I guess, on LeBron and AD's health, but they could string together a couple games last year, and I guess with the idea that some of these guys can take the flak a little bit more, maybe they can have a couple games off. The one I just don't see the Clippers at all, if I'm honest. I understand why you put them in there, but I just don't. I can't see it.
As I say, I had them on knocking on the door. I think, personally, if you asked me to pick what the Western Conference Finals would be, I'd say it'd be some of the Nuggets. What I'd be interested in hearing is, because, George, obviously you said you don't particularly think the Suns is going to work out, and you didn't think Denver would be in the realm. I'd be interested to hear who you think is going to be coming out of the West then, or what your Western Conference final matchup would be.
For me, and again, this is probably just there are a multitude of factors that going into it, but I mean, I see the Warriors just being thereabouts. They just are every single year. If Steph avoids injury, they're going to be there for me. The way in which I see that team work every single time. And it's going to be an interesting one with CP3 there. I don't know how they're necessarily going to play it, because I don't think he's going to sit comfortable coming off as a sixth man. I think they're going to have him I know they've said they're going to put him in the starting lineup now, but things change in any case. But I'll wait to see how it works. But I mean, every time they try something, it does just seem to pull off for them. They seem to be a step above for him in terms of things like this. Andrew Wiggins, I think, will have a really solid year again. I think he will improve on the basis of that when Steph was out, he showed that he could take that team and be that, not the first guy, but that second guy in realms. And I just think it comes down to points of sort of the heritage. And I know the Nuggets have now got it with a chip, but I can't rule out the Warriors for it. And I just see them being more hungry with that sort of chip on their shoulder of last year. But yeah.
I think the interesting thing with the Warriors, I think, is two things. I think one, when we'll get on to potential trades that could still happen, but I think they've sided with now, in the previous couple of seasons, I think they were focused on their sort of transition from the dynasty which they had and trying to incorporate those young players in. And I think they've come to the decision now that hasn't worked, and they're slowly removing, your Wisemans, your Jordan Poole. I know Jordan Poole's a separate situation, but even so, he's one of those players. And I think Kuminga's one that's going to come up in the trade conversations we have, and they're signing people like a Chris Paul instead. The only thing that worries me about the Warriors is generally when we see a breakout team or a team that we think we could last for a while, and I think most people, even if you don't have them in the realms this season, you think the Nuggets will be around for a while with the roster they've got, is usually that sort of shapes how the league moves or which direction the league goes. And I think what we'll see this season is more people trying to get some more size to counteract like a Jokic, for example. And I think that's one thing the Warriors at the moment will struggle with. And I look at a team like the Suns maybe are in that as well. Obviously they've got Ayton, but we saw what happened when Jokic came up against Ayton. But then I look at someone like the Lakers, and I think they've got that next season to put up more of a challenge, even though they did get swept by the Nuggets last year. But I think that it's the scoreline didn't show the whole picture there. So that's why I would have more confidence in the Lakers than the Warriors.
I can see it going a bit the other way there, in terms of like maybe you just sacrifice those pieces a little bit because whoever you're going to put in front of Jokic is not, or AD maybe, or like potentially Embiid if he can never stay healthy enough for the playoffs. They're not really going to be able to stop them. I think there's a couple of interesting like players that could maybe be on the move this season anyway. And a lot of them that I think of are big men. I feel like Towns is one of those. Towns is a big name that could potentially move somewhere. Ayton, I don't think he's safe in Phoenix, if I'm quite honest. And I think he may want to go somewhere where he's got like a bit more responsibility.
Did they not say that they wanted to run him though? I thought he was.
They can say whatever they want.
Yeah, I think it's more. I think it's also more from the Ayton side of things as well. I think I remember there being some sort of interview or leak where he said he wouldn't mind trying a fresh start or something. So I think it's definitely brewing. As Louis said, a couple other players like Clint Capella, he's been linked with the Mavs
Jared Allen
the whole time. Jared Allen with the Cavs and their double big men, maybe they want to try and move one of them on. Nurkic, even though he's obviously a lot older now, is a big body that could move. Valanciunas as well. There's a few. I know I'm just listing the big men and saying there are some that I think will maybe see a couple of these contending teams or teams knocking on the door pick up, prospecting with who they're going to have to face with a Embiid or a Giannis or a Jokic or an AD. I just think it seems as though that's the direction the league is going to go in.
Oh, I thought
I was going to say.
I mean, but yeah, in terms of where we're going around title contenders, I mean, we've spoken about the two that we each realistically think for it. So we'll move on from that, and we'll move over onto playoff contenders. Now, obviously, there is going to be fall off from whoever we're putting in the title contenders are automatically going to be playoff contenders. That is that's a gimme. But it's more of the guys that are normally on the berth, on the realm, and the play-ins. Like, where do you see? What would you expect to see of a team? What teams do you expect to be in and around that area come playoff time? I know I hate talking about playoffs this early, but it's always a question for it.
I guess this is interesting. Like where we're dividing like your solid playoff picks, like I was saying, like the Grizzlies or someone like that, because they're going to get in the playoffs, obviously. To your, I guess, new sort of like surprising teams.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I'll throw. I mean, we talked about the Thunder in a previous podcast, and people can listen to them. I think they'll be in that mix this year. A name I'll throw out there, which again a bit risky, but I like their upside, is the Pelicans, and I always like their upside going into the season. It just depends, obviously, on Zion's health and Ingram's health, actually, because he was injured quite a lot last season. I just think like we haven't seen those two on the court for a sustained period of time together. I just like the upside offensively with those two personally. I like the team that they have around them. I think the circus effect or like the negative implications or sort of like perceptions you have about the New Orleans Pelicans purely come from the fact that their best player, the guy they're sort of hanging their hat on, just can't stay on the court and stay healthy. And you'd like to think just like one of the worst sobering off seasons that anyone has ever had as a player. And, you know, just the hype he's had ever since he's come into the league, you would hope that this just forces him into gear a little bit. I know his body is so unique and he's going to have problems because of that, but I like them. You know, at their peak, they were, I think, like the first seed last year, very early on. I'm not saying that they were going to go any further than that, but I just think they can be very good. And on the east side, I quite like the Orlando Magic, you know. I thought they were good last year. I think they can take a step up potentially with Banchero in his second season. I just like the mix of players they have there. I like Wagner. I like Wendell Carter Jr. as well. Wendell Carter Jr. Cole Anthony, all those guys. So they're the team that I think maybe could surprise a few. And there's obviously just other like solid playoff contenders that I just don't think like they're not worthy of being put into this bracket, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I will say with the East and the West, looking at the lower part of the playoffs and the play-ins, it's very different in that when you start listing off the teams in the West, like I'll just run through it quickly now. You've got the Nuggets, the Suns, the Lakers, the Warriors. I think everyone would agree they're all shoo-ins. I think the Grizzlies will regress a little bit compared to the record they had last year, but I'd pick them as a shoo-in. Then after that, you got the Kings, the Mavs, the Thunder, the Timberwolves. You know, the point is, and then the Pelicans. There's going to be one or two teams that are you would think a playoff caliber or playing caliber team in the West that just are going to miss out. I think it's very difficult to try and really figure out which one that's going to be. And when I look at a team like the Pelicans, obviously their offensive upside is just explosive, and if everyone can stay healthy, you can easily make the argument they're going to get playoff or play in. But the problem is there's multiple teams around them that you can basically argue the exact same thing for, so sifting through them is very difficult. Whereas when you look at the East, there's like 3 or 4 spots up for grabs where any team that makes that next step, be it the Magic, who I also like for that as well, Louis, or maybe the Bulls pull it together and push up a little bit. Maybe the Pacers do, exactly, yeah. Then you've still got the Raptors. It feels like in the West, it's someone's going to drop out, but in the East, it feels like there's going to be a couple that make that step up. And I think that's the difference in the conferences.
All right, so the question that I was going to ask and pose to you two was, what is the biggest team that you think will not make the playoffs? Because that's the way in which we can go about it and sort of reverse engineer it. But what I've actually done...
Play in?
Well, in general, I think if we're going to... if you're going to say the playoffs, I think you under the assumption that they either get in normally, traditionally, or they win the play-in. Like, that's just how we go about it. But what we'll do instead, I found a sports book with the odds on making and missing the playoffs. So I'm going to run through each team. I'm not going to be like, do you think the Celtics will make the playoffs? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go from the bottom. And then you just say yes or no. So I'll start. I'll go. We'll break it off really simple. The Washington Wizards.
No.
No.
The San Antonio Spurs.
No.
Probably not.
No.
Oh, probably. Okay. The Pistons.
No, but I think they'll be better. But no, they won't make the playoffs. They won't be the worst team in the East.
I'm going to go probably not as well. Right, Spurs.
Right.
So
Houston.
probably not.
Yeah, I'm saying no, but I do think once again they'll.
That's a
improve
biggie
quite
as
a bit.
well. New coach, a lot of money.
Utah.
No. That one
Charlotte.
I think is they're just under. No, I think Charlotte could be the worst team in the East next year.
Oh, really? I don't think that. I don't
think
think
they could be.
Fair enough.
That's okay. So
It's either gonna
Orlando,
be them
you're
or-
both coy on Orlando.
I think
Yeah,
they'll make the
they'll
play-in
make
at the
the
very
step up.
least.
Yeah, I think they'll make the play-in. Yeah, agreed.
Toronto.
No.
Yeah, I think they will.
Oh, really? I don't think
Split
they will.
decision.
I think there'll be some trades
Actually,
there. Is the issue?
Yeah, no, you know what? Yeah, I changed my mind. I don't think they will because I do think there'll be a trade. Yeah.
Okay. Chicago.
Yeah, I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, at least
Yes.
playing. At least playing.
And then Nets and Pacers.
I don't
This
know
is
what the
an
maths is at this
interesting
stage. Probably
yeah,
messed
I'm
up.
looking. So basically,
See, the
let me
Dallas
just- I'll
Mavericks
just
are
say-
the Dallas Mavericks are 2-5 to make the playoffs. I think there is some value in the fact of that they're 7-4 to not make the playoffs.
I'll say, Louis, at the moment, if we put because I'm just saying this because we're both answering it. If you put the Magic in and the Raptors are out, then all the teams that were in before you can say again. So unless you've got one of the Pacers, Hornets, Pistons, or Wizards moving in, then you can keep it the same. So what I'd ask is, do you have
I
the
think the
Pacers
Pacers-
moving in for the Nets?
Do I think the
basically?
Pacers and Magic are better? That's a. I'm in
I
my
think
head.
Indiana are being a bit underrated here. Indiana are
Yeah,
good.
they are. They were good when Halliburton was healthy.
Yeah.
Is
They've
I'm
got
gonna
Bruce
say
Brown
it.
coming in now as well. They've
Yeah,
got
that's
some
true,
nice
true.
pieces down in Indiana.
The only thing as well with Indiana is you need to worry about what's going to happen with Buddy Hield. Like, what can they get? For
I'm
that?
assuming he's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Buddy
Like,
Hield's gone.
What are they getting
But
back? Is what I'm saying.
With or without Buddy Hield, I'm still having Indiana probably there or thereabouts.
Over
I'd lean
Orlando?
more on. Yes, I would over Orlando.
That's fair
I
enough.
think they're a better fit. I think they've got more players and they're more set. I think they're going to build further. I think Banchero will have a great year, but I don't necessarily think that will translate into the Magic winning games. That's how I see things at the moment. Whereas I think the Pacers are more set up for this, and I think Halliburton, I really like Halliburton, and they got really nice guards. I like them hard. So
Mathurin.
maybe I'm just a bit too coy on Indiana, but I just see them making a step. I mean, both of them might make it, and someone else dramatically
what do you think
fall
about the
out, but-
Nets? What do you think about the Nets? Do you think they'll make it?
It is the year-on-year question. It all depends on what Ben Simmons does. If Ben Simmons comes in and he plays 60 games and he looks unreal, then yeah, the Brooklyn Nets are probably going to make the playoffs. If he doesn't play any games, no, they're not. It's as simple as that for me. I think Mikal Bridges will look amazing, and then he'll be the guy that is in massive trade talks come February. I think he'll be like that one that there are teams circling to try and acquire him, and that's how it's going to go about. Because I don't think like people aren't going to be moving in for Nick Claxton or things like that. It's going to be Bridges, but it all depends on where their season is come then. I think he's amazing, Mikal Bridges. So if any team can land him, it'd take a lot. But if a team's on the perennial of challenging in that scope, and that's whenever we start talking about it in January, February, I think he's going to be one of the realistic options from the below teams that could be got in a trade, and I think he'll be one of the best ones out there for him. So,
I think with the East, with the last two spots, I think I'd pick two from everyone else who was in before staying in. It would be Nets, not in this order, Nets, Magic, Pacers, Raptors. I think I'd pick two from them four to take the last two spots.
I think the Nets were the worst team in the playoffs last year by quite a distance as well. I don't think they're very good. And like you said, I like Mikal Bridges. I don't know about Ben Simmons, and no one does. So think I'll hold off on firing any opinions at this stage on that.
Mm.
I don't think they'll trade him. I think they want to keep that guy and make him a bit of a centerpiece. Whether you think he can be that or not is a different.
Simmons?
Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges.
Yeah, Simmons I just want to play first of all.
If you're doing 2 of those 4, I'm tempted to go Magic and Pacers.
I think I'd go that
Nets
as
and
well.
Raptors
I'd just go with the outside.
What was the 4?
Yeah.
What was the 4?
It was Magic, Pacers, Nets, Raptors. Basically, I think everyone else that was in the playoffs or play-ins last year will make it again. Apart from I think the Nets and the Raptors are the options where they might not.
As long as there isn't any more exits apart from Buddy Hield and Indiana, I think they'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then it's then a toss-up between Toronto and the Magic for me is where I'd be on that one. And again, Toronto is such a big question mark depending on do they keep Scotty Barnes, where else do they go with a few things. But I mean, the Siakam stuff's gone absolutely dead quiet, it seems, as well. But I mean, that's where we are.
What's his value, isn't it? It's difficult to decide.
I think that's the issue, that his value is literally at the worst it's ever been. And then it gets to the point of, do you try and trade him or run it back for a year and get it up a bit and go from there? But okay, so that's sort of playoff bits. I mean, the tanking side of things, I don't think we need to spend too long mentioning about sort of tankers, because, I mean, it'll be Charlotte, they'll be tanking again and letting LaMelo try and get like 25, 5 and 10.
I'm not even sure. But when we talk about tanking and like purposefully trying to tank, I'm not sure there'll be any teams in the league next year that are really trying to make sure they get that bottom tier space in the league. Because even though I think the Hornets, if I had to make a prediction, I think I'd say the Hornets will be last. It'd be them, the Pistons, or the Wizards. Will be fighting between them 3 for who's going to be bottom. But I don't think any of them are going to be purposefully doing it until it gets to the point in that season where it happens.
Yeah.
Purposefully tanking from day one, I don't think there will be a franchise in the league that does it. But I would suspect very quickly, once the trade goes through, that Portland pretty much aim at we're getting.
Oh yeah.
So,
if Dame goes, 100%.
I don't think it's if. I think it's when. I can't. There's no way. Even if he's still there when the season starts, I don't think he's gonna. I don't think he'll be playing.
Yeah.
Because I think they're just gonna white shirt him for it. But I think Portland will be doing it, and to a lesser extent, I think Washington will be doing it. I think their sole aim is to put Jordan Poole's value right back up there, move him on, and then try and rebuild from that. I don't think they're going to rebuild around Jordan Poole, is how I see it.
Yeah, I think the tanking conversation is a bit less pronounced this year, because obviously last year teams were competing for Wembanyama, and there's other good players in that draft as well. So I think it's not quite as clear cut this year. There's like a sort of like amazing prospect. There's definitely not like a generational prospect anyway, like Victor Wembanyama was. So I don't think, like Lewis said or you said, I don't think people are going to be purposely tanking. It just happens sometimes when you realise, well, we're really rubbish. So I think some players, like the Spurs are in there because I think they're just trying to develop young players basically. Spurs, the Trailblazers, the Hornets, the Wizards, the Pistons, probably.
I mean, we're talking about teams that will accidentally stumble upon it. I'll tell you what, if Chicago have a bad start, and then if like DeRozan will be the one that goes. But then if DeRozan goes and they try and get something for Levine, and then I don't think anyone's really going to pick Vucevic up for his contract. I think Chicago could be looking at some tanking. But
yeah, that is a good point actually.
I think Chicago, in terms of the larger, not larger franchises, it's the wrong word, the sort of the teams that we'd expect to be realistically vibing for playoffs, I think Chicago is probably one of them.
We haven't mentioned the Cavs or Knicks in this podcast actually as of yet. Knicks are strange.
I'll tell you what, I am not quietly confident on the Knicks, but I think the Knicks are for the first time in what it seems forever, I don't think the Knicks are in a sort of panicked state. I don't think they're in a disaster area. I think that, look, could Julius Randle have been better in the playoffs? Absolutely. But I think it's too soon to be like, he needs to move him on, move everything around. Jalen Brunson's wasting his time there. RJ Barrett's an absolute, I think it's quite a chilled out area for the Knicks. And don't get me wrong, if they go sort of 2-8 in the first 10 games, it won't be. But I think they're in a pretty good little stead. And I think as well, and I know we've said, and this is a nice little segue onto the final part of this podcast in terms of what we're expecting for the year. But in terms of thinking about potential trades that are still to come, I think if the Knicks could get Karl Anthony Towns, I think that trade's been floated around for years as well as Cat being in MSG.
Yeah.
But I think if you got Cat with Brunson, I think they'd have to give Randall up, and I think Randall would fit in the Timberwolves' set up a bit better than what Towns and Gobert does. I think if they can manage something there, they'd have to get a third team involved. I think it'd be beneficial for all the parties involved. But that's how I see it.
The way I'd describe the Knicks at the moment is I think they've steadied the ship, and they're a team that's poised to make a move to try and make that push into the higher tiers of the Eastern Conference. And I think that's what everyone agrees.
And that where they are now, that's tremendous from where they were a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The Knicks were genuinely a laughing stock like 3-4 years ago for it.
It was all about improving perception, wasn't it? And being a place where players actually wanted to come to, because they would get laughed out of the room in any sort of big free agency meetings or conversations, and they have done that to a certain extent, I feel like.
Do you remember, when they pretty much waived Porzingis, they were mocked throughout everything. And granted, it went a bit to and fro, but ultimately, it's probably one of the better decisions they've made in a very long time, because it gave them the building blocks to be able to do what they've done for it. The only other team we haven't mentioned, it just as a general thing, what's to expect, do you feel, of the Kings this year? Because obviously they had such a buoyant rise last year. Whereabouts would you expect for them to be next season? What are you expecting from them?
I think it's a tough one, because they're not a team where you intuitively think, oh yeah, that's an easy lock for playoffs. It's more only when you look at the roster, I'm saying here. It's more when you look at how they performed last season, you think, can they keep up at the very least that level of offense? And I do think that they won't be the third seed anymore. But I think based off what I saw last season, they should be able to make the playoffs fine. Whether it's probably, if I had to guess, it'd be quite a low playoff seed. But I think they should be fine to make it based off what came last year. I don't think it's something they can't repeat. Although some of the teams, obviously, in the West, I do think have got better. I still think they'll be all right.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I guess they were really reliant on just like a really explosive offensive system last year, which just sort of like in a season where a lot of teams just kind of mad it in. There are a lot of big all-star caliber players just didn't play last season, which won't be the case this year, probably because they've got that 65 minimum to qualify for the big awards. I think that kind of carried them for a little bit, so I do expect a little bit of a drop off. It's not like I like the fact that they've got sort of like a consistency to their the roster. Like, there's not been many people that have left that were actually important to what they were doing. So I like that. We saw the benefit of that with the Nuggets last year, but I do agree that there are just some stronger teams in the West this year, and they should be stronger throughout the year. So that should put them down a little bit. But I still expect them to be in. I don't think they'll be in play-in. They'll be in the sort of
7-8, maybe 6-7-8,
6-5. I could even see 4. I could see them going above the Warriors in the regular season, to be honest, something like that. Or the Suns if they just again don't decide to play or get injuries or whatever. If they didn't make the playoffs, I'd be really, really surprised, basically.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Is there anything else that you want to speak about in terms of what you'd expect?
We're gonna
go in depth on like our predictions of who we think is going to win, player predictions, and all the awards. But just as another thing, who did you want to speak about before we wrap this up?
So the last team I'd talk about, and I think this ties in with what we're going to talk about now with the trades, is I think one team that there could be a lot of volatility is the Hawks, because of what's been surrounding them, whether who they're going to pick up, who they're going to get rid of. Because obviously you've got Trey still, who I think gives you a certain floor that you can't really go below just because of his production. But then what comes from that will depend on what they do with Capella, whether they try and bring someone in. I know they were interested in Siakam, and those types of moves I think could, because of how weak the lower part of the East is, it could move them anywhere from sixth maybe, all the way down to like 10th, so ninth or 10th. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with them. I don't think they'll go any lower than that, just because trade does give you that level of production. But it'll be interesting to see what moves they make to see where they finish.
Atlanta are a weird one for it.
Yeah.
They're. I don't even have much words for Atlanta, because it is really fundamental on what their trades are, because they can't.
Yeah.
They need to do some movements, because they can't run it back like they did again. But I don't see what they necessarily do. Again, they might be a team that's involved in a third team, like in a big trade with a few teams, is how I think, because I don't see what value they're going to get for Clint Capella that's then going to then move the needle for them. I'm not sure I'm necessarily sold on Murray and Trey anyway, but again,
I'm not. And the thing is, I guess with Trey now that they've brought in Quinn Snyder, and I think they've given him quite a bit of money, there's been two coaches that Trey has kind of, if we're being honest, kind of got rid of, getting rid of them a little bit. I don't think he's going to get that opportunity this time if it doesn't go well. So that's one to keep an eye on, I do think. And I've said about it before, I think they should probably trade him at some stage. I don't think his DeJounte Murray's ceiling is as high as Trey's, obviously, offensively. I think he's just maybe an easier player to build around and a bit more well-rounded in terms of defense, but not playmaking, but it's mainly the defense, because that's just non-existent with Trey.
Yeah.
So I think that's one to keep an eye on, definitely.
Indeed it is. Is there anything else that you want to speak about, you two?
Not on teams. I don't know if we want to talk about a couple of players that we think maybe
I
might
feel like we
shake up
mentioned a
things.
few of them.
Yeah, I mean,
I
we've
feel like
talked
we mentioned
about
it.
Dame.
Is there one big one that you wanted to speak about or not?
I don't know about big one. I was just trying to think about when we talked about the Pacers and Buddy Hill. I think maybe we could see something with the Cavs with them. I think the Cavs would like a player like Buddy Hill, and I think maybe that could also trigger a potential Jared Allen moving, and then a Miles Turner moving on somewhere else, because they've got another
Miles
team
Turner,
involved. So I think, I'm just saying, I think that could be a move that puts the dominoes in place to then really get a few teams trading.
I agree that they were really bad in the playoffs last year with that too big front court. I feel like something needs to happen a bit differently there. Yeah, I mean, we mentioned Towns. I think that's something that will definitely happen personally, because it's a one that you need to make a decision on, I guess, at some stage, is what I think personally. So that's one. I think the title contender teams don't really have a lot of moves to make. Like Brown and Tatum are not getting traded. The Bucks are kind of locked in, I feel like, with Middleton signing that extension, Holiday, Giannis, we'll keep an eye on that, I guess. And then, all the Warriors are going to stay. The Clippers is an interesting one. That's one actually, maybe.
It's the Clippers and the Heat. It's the Clippers and the Heat in terms of the bigger teams.
Well, when you say the Heat,
what happens?
What you mean, people going out from the Heat or coming in?
Well, I mean, if
they
Dame
get
comes
Dame,
in,
surely, it's just that.
If
Like,
Dame
that is
comes
just
in,
yeah.
Then I'd assume Tyler Hero and maybe Bam has to go, but that's probably going to be
Not Bam. No, Bam.
No, but
Bam's not going. Bam's not going. They will not go to him.
You don't think in any circumstance they're going to move?
I don't think. Well, you say
no,
any,
I don't think so.
Any reasonable circumstance that I think could actually happen in real life, not like if some player comes available.
And then the other one will be just what happens with James Harden, but that's if the Clippers are involved in that one. So
I think Paul George. I think Paul George may be one to keep an eye on personally. Just throwing it out there. Kawhi has not really got it. No, not for Sixers, just anyone.
Just in general.
Anyone. I think Kawhi doesn't really have any value at this stage, just with the injuries. He was in Sid Cup, by the way, just a little diversion. That was very strange. But I think Paul George does have, he's had his injury issues as well. I'm not saying that, but I think he's got a lot of value if they have another bad season and they want to move things on a little bit there. I think that's one to keep an eye on personally. And then I mentioned they could be like a potentially surprisingly good team this year, but if it doesn't work with Zion this year, maybe I would look at that as well.
I think that's a good place to wrap this one up. So thank you very much for watching and listening. If you're not subscribed to us here on YouTube, please get that subscribe button. And if you're watching us or listening to us on your Spotify, your Apple Podcasts, drop us a follow on there and leave us a review. It would really help us out. But apart from that,
the podcast is going to start ramping up again because we're less than a month away now from tip off of the NBA season. And yeah, we'll catch you in the next podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and